What's up, everyone? Today we're going to be decandling these 4 mini pines. Alright, well, it's not going to take me very long to actually decandle these, so I'm going to end up talking about it probably more than I am, for more time than I'm going to spend actually showing you how to do this. So it's midsummer here in San Francisco, actually the beginning of June, which is technically still spring, but we have a cold summer, and so decandling is done a little bit earlier than it might be done in other places in the country. But specifically when it comes to making miniature, kind of very small trees, the decandling is typically done later in order to make the growth really small. However, these guys are all pretty young, and so I'm not too concerned about how long they have to grow afterwards. I just want to remove the coarse spring growth from them and get them going with creating finer growth. This tree is 1 year old, or it's in its second growing season, and it was the same batch that we sold as bare root pines. It's now in this little teeny pot by Bob Potts, and this is, I believe, in its 3rd year, and it's been in this container since last spring. Same with this one. This one I potted from a 3.5-inch container into this past winter, and so it's also in its 3rd year. These guys are the same age, but as opposed to these 3, this one was candle cut last summer in its 2nd year, and that caused it to make a lot of little buds. And I've now gone ahead and candle cut it for the 2nd time. And so what you can see here is that there's a lot of buds. In fact, I had to thin it a lot because there were buds kind of all over the place. And that's not as much the case with these guys because they haven't previously been candle cut. This is one of the same batch as the one I was just showing you that hasn't been candle cut. So let's start with this 3-year-old that has not previously been candle cut. This extension is not very strong, and that's because it's in such a small container, but I'm actually going to cut it back really hard. And the reason is that I want to keep the growth really compact. So even little short kind of growth like this, I'm going to cut off. That's this year's growth. I'm leaving last year's needles. Same with this one. Now on this one, it's not looking perfect. I'm not really sure whether it's got some insect damage or something, but I'm going to go ahead and cut it back anyway. But I'm going to cut it back past the node. I've cut it back past the node, and that's because it was longer than the others. This one, not too long, so I'm going to decandle that as well. And then there's a little bud in the middle here that I don't really need, so I'm going to just remove that. Those are all right around the 1-year node, and that's a place where these guys typically, when they're young, pretty reliably bud back. The rest of this growth I'm not sure that I like as much, so I'm not going to cut it all off all at once, but what I am going to do is I'm going to start by decandling this one and then entirely removing this. So this is the 2nd year's growth that I'm removing in its entirety. Now what I'm left with here are 3 buds that are coming out at the 2nd year node and a bunch of needles. Each one of these needles has the potential to make more buds, but actually I'm not sure that I like the entirety of this trunk line. I kind of want to cut it back a little bit further and back just to those buds that are at the 1-year node, I think. Actually, it's growing on me as I look at it a little bit. Let's try cutting it right here under the 2nd year node and leaving a bunch of the 2nd year needles. Now we have to kind of envision what the tree is going to do in reaction to what we're doing to it here. I'm cutting the needles short to reduce the vigor of the tree and also to make it easier for me to tell exactly where things are coming from. I think I'll leave it like that. So I've removed probably 80 to 90% of the total foliage mass. And with a healthy young black pine like this, that's really not an issue. So as opposed to this one, where that was the first session of decandling I've done, this was actually decandled in its second year as well. So you're seeing that there's more distributed growth here. There's also a symptomatic problem here of a root pathogen. So I've treated it for that, and I'm going to now cut this back pretty heavily. I'm not concerned about the trunk getting any bigger, so I'm not trying to save growth like keeping a sacrifice branch on or anything like that. All I'm concerned with here is just getting lots of fine twiggy little branches, and I'm not even super concerned about what their exact shape is. This one I'm going to cut back behind the node, at the node, at the node, at the node. This one way behind the node. In fact, I'm going to cut off almost all of it and just leave these needles from last year. And then this one's kind of weak. I'll just cut that at the node, cut this one at the node. And there's too many things coming out right here, so I'm going to take this one off entirely. Still too many things coming out here. So with that much cut back, I can now kind of concentrate on these little buds, and I think I have one too many here, so I'm just going to take out the middle one. And voila. I'm going to pull a couple of these needles, but I'm not going to pull all of them, or even most of them, because that will give the tree more sites where it can push new growth. So as you would imagine, every time you handle cut, you get sort of a multiplication effect of the number of buds. And rather than just growing this out for the trunk, because I want the trunk to stay really small, I'm creating small little bends and changes in direction from the cuts as well as from the wiring that was done to the trunk. This one's looking a little bit like a mess, but I'm going to take care of that relatively quickly. This is the second year node, so this was bent over, and I was trying to make kind of an interesting shape, but then all of these branches came out of the second year node. That's really typical, and it can be kind of problematic because it can cause a little bit of a swelling there. I'm actually going to take all of these lower ones off because they're just making it look messy. There's also some little buds back down in here. I'm going to go ahead and leave those on because even though they're on the bottom, oh, look at that. There's some on the top too, so I'll take off at least one of these ones that's on the bottom. And I'm kind of going through here and pulling off little bits, little needles, trying to sort of figure out exactly what the structure looks like. But I really don't want any of these big coarse pieces. And on a regular size pine, I wouldn't be saying that because they're actually not that coarse. Now what's left are a couple of small candles, so I'm going to go ahead and cut those as well. And just like the big buds that I cut off, there are some smaller buds right here at the 2-year node. So I'm going to leave a couple of them, but eliminate most of those to reduce the chances of further swelling. So the good things about this one are that all of these little things right here are actually needle buds that have come out. So if this doesn't kind of resolve itself over the course of the rest of the summer or into next year, I can just cut it back past that. into the other buds that are going to be coming out in the summer. So as opposed to those two, this one spent all last summer in a larger container, and that has given it quite a bit more vigor, even though it was repotted over the winter. And the trunk is about the same. It has quite a bit longer extension. And just like those two, I really don't want any of that extension. The wiring that happened kind of stopped here, so there's not really as interesting a movement here. And I could cut it anywhere in here. So I can decandle it here just above the second ear node or just below the second ear node. If I decandle it above, then I'll get buds coming from that ring of dormant buds at the node. And if I decandle it below, I'm going to get some buds coming out from in between these needles. But all of that is too big for me, so I'm going to actually decandle it way down here. And you might be asking yourself, well, there's no needles there. And that's kind of true. The tree's pretty healthy, I can tell. And I'm cutting off so much of its growth that I can tell you that each one of these little buds that's kind of like popping out here, but is still really teeny, which was being inhibited by all that large growth, is now going to take off and start growing into some nice summer growth. The needles will be shorter, and the nodes will be shorter as well, so we'll get some nice compact growth. And then next year, maybe I'll have more growth, sort of like these other guys that I've decandled twice. Now, for my final example, I have this 1-year-old, and it's so tiny that I actually think it's kind of difficult. Like, I prefer doing these size trees with something like Kishu or like a Chinese elm, like a Seiju Chinese elm that has a very small leaf or something like this. This is just a regular Japanese black pine seedling. And so I've wired it, and I'm actually sort of unwound the wire and rewound the wire. So I'm going to cut these short, and then I'm just going to cut off all of this year's growth. And I am expecting that I'll get a bunch of little buds coming out here. I don't know whether or not I'll actually get any true needles. Sometimes they send out just these, like, basically what looks just like what I have here, which are bracts rather than needles. So I'll have to watch it and see what it does for the rest of the summer. If you want to pick up some starters to get yourself on the way to making some little teeny Japanese black pine, you can find them on Bonsaify.com. If you have experience with making tiny little pines, share your comments below with everyone else. Thanks for watching. We'll see you guys next time.